The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of budding wisteria and freshly turned soil, a delicate promise of spring that seemed almost cruel against the tension within the Ashford estate. Lady Eleanor moved carefully along the gravel path, her skirts rustling softly, a pale blue gown clinging modestly to her slender frame. The sun struck the polished edges of the wrought iron gates, scattering flecks of light across the manicured lawn, yet Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She knew that today, as every day in this season of grand gatherings, she would be measured, weighed, and dismissed in whispered judgments. Her heart trembled at the thought of her sister, whose cruel wit was sharpened not by necessity, but by the sheer delight of watching Eleanor falter. Her elder sister, Lady Marguerite, approached with a calculated grace, her golden hair gleaming in the sunlight like spun silk, her emerald gown catching every eye along the way. She paused just long enough to offer a sweet smile, but it carried no warmth, only the faint sting of derision. "Do try not to look so forlorn, Eleanor," she said, voice light and musical, masking its venom. "Though, of course, one wonders if any gentleman of sense would look your way." Her laughter tinkled like glass, sharp and deliberate, designed to echo in the minds of all who witnessed it. Eleanor's chest tightened, her fingers clutching the delicate folds of her skirt, the fabric a poor shield against the assault of words. Eleanor's gaze fell to the flower beds lining the path, where roses, buds yet unbroken, leaned into the sun as if whispering secrets she might never share. She drew a slow breath, tasting the faint sweetness in the air, reminding herself that she was more than idle gossip and sharp tongues. Her reflection in the polished surface of a marble fountain caught her attention. A girl with a soft face framed by loose chestnut curls, eyes a quiet hazel, carrying both trepidation and an undimmed spark of dignity. She was often overlooked, dismissed by society as plain, yet beneath the careful modesty of her appearance lived a mind both observant and tender, capable of noticing small mercies and hidden kindnesses that others missed entirely. The estate was alive with preparation. Servants in crisp white shirts scurried across cobblestones, arranging tables, polishing silverware, and lighting candles that would soon illuminate the evening halls. The air was punctuated by the distant hum of carriage wheels on stone and the faint clatter of hooves as horses were readied for arrival. Through the open windows of the main hall, Eleanor could hear the stirring strains of a piano practice, hesitant notes, as if the instrument itself sensed the approaching day of scrutiny and ceremony. Every sound, every movement, pressed upon her nerves, reminding her that she must navigate the rigid rules of propriety, the unspoken hierarchy of the court, and the sharp-tongued judgments of those who thrived on the misfortunes of others. Marguerite's voice returned, carrying over the soft rustle of leaves and the distant preparations. "No one will love you," she murmured, low enough for a few nearby courtiers to hear, yet loud enough that Eleanor felt the words pierce her very chest. "I do hope you understand that, Eleanor. You might wish it were otherwise, but reality is seldom forgiving." The courtiers murmured among themselves, glances flitting between sisters, and Eleanor felt the full weight of their attention. She had been trained to hold her head high, to curtsy with grace, to respond with politeness even to cruelty. Yet the sting was no less real. The world outside the gardens, with all its gilded charm and careful etiquette, seemed suddenly vast, cold, and indifferent to the gentle virtues she possessed. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the sash at her waist, a gesture meant to anchor herself in some small semblance of composure. She thought of her mother's advice, given years ago with a patient smile, that kindness, intelligence, and quiet courage were worth more than the hollow praise of a court full of gossipers. Yet even with these words in her mind, Eleanor felt a surge of despair, imagining a future where she would always be second, always overlooked, always the subject of whispered ridicule. The thought was suffocating, yet beneath it stirred something fragile, the faint hope that perhaps the world held one soul who could see her truly, beyond appearances, beyond the cruel echoes of her sister's laughter. The garden stretched before her, a labyrinth of meticulously trimmed hedges and fragrant blooms. Eleanor wandered among them, seeking refuge from the eyes that seemed to follow her every movement. She paused beside a rose bush, the pale petals trembling in the breeze, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Here, in this secluded corner, she could breathe without pretense, without the constant pressure of performance. The scent of roses filled her senses, mingling with the faint aroma of damp earth and the distant smoke of hearth fires, grounding her in the present, if only briefly. A sudden movement caught her eye. The Duke of Ashford, tall and commanding, yet with a warmth in his dark eyes that belied his imposing presence. He was speaking with a few guests near the edge of the lawn, his posture relaxed but unmistakably noble. Eleanor's gaze lingered on him, noting the easy grace with which he moved, the quiet attentiveness that distinguished him from the ostentation of others. There was no arrogance in his manner, only a subtle authority, coupled with the capacity to observe and appreciate details that escaped most men of his standing. For a moment, she allowed herself the dangerous indulgence of hope, a delicate flutter in her chest, as though perhaps her own worth might be seen after all. Marguerite's laughter cut through the gentle rustle of the garden, sharp and deliberate, and Eleanor flinched. She lowered her eyes, adjusting the folds of her gown as if to shield herself. Yet the Duke's attention, fleeting though it was, had already marked her. He had noticed the quiet grace with which she bore herself, the restrained intelligence in her gaze, the subtle defiance that hinted at inner strength. Eleanor felt the stirrings of a shift, a movement in the delicate balance of her world. Perhaps the day held more than derision and whispered scorn. Perhaps a door might open where before there had been only walls. She took another slow breath, drawing in the scent of roses and the faint warmth of sunlight upon her shoulders, and allowed herself a cautious sense of possibility. The path before her seemed simultaneously narrow and infinite, fraught with peril, yet illuminated by the faint gleam of hope. And as she straightened her posture, ready to face the day's trials, a quiet awareness settled in her chest, that even amid ridicule and scorn, there existed the promise of recognition, of understanding, and perhaps of love that could arrive unbidden, at the most unexpected moment. Eleanor's heart, though still heavy with trepidation, beat with the first faint rhythm of anticipation, waiting for the world, and the Duke, to see her not as a shadow, but as herself. The ballroom shimmered like a constellation come to earth, gilded mirrors reflecting the glow of hundreds of candles that trembled in the polished crystal chandeliers overhead. The marble floor gleamed beneath polished shoes, carrying dancers in a fluid rhythm that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the estate itself. Gentle strains of violins intertwined with the measured steps of a waltz, each note a delicate bridge between decorum and desire. Lady Eleanor entered quietly, her pale blue gown now accented with a ribbon of silver at her waist, modest yet elegant, drawing whispers from those attuned to beauty, though not yet daring to speak it aloud. She kept her gaze low, palms pressed lightly to her skirts, moving as if through a dream she had not yet learned to command. Her sister, Marguerite, swept past in a gown of deep emerald, adorned with jewels that glimmered like trapped sunlight. Every head turned, every whisper followed her, as she spun a web of admiration and envy in equal measure. Her lips curved in a faint, cruel smile, and as she approached Eleanor, her voice rang clear over the strains of music, carefully pitched for effect. "I do hope your evening proves more tolerable than your appearance," she said, the words feather-light yet barbed, designed to pierce the quiet hope Eleanor had carried into the hall. Courtiers nearby laughed softly, a chorus of polite cruelty that Eleanor could neither ignore nor confront. She bowed her head, letting the words slide over her like rain on stone, but they seeped nonetheless, chilling her blood. Eleanor's eyes roamed the room, taking in the glittering display, polished boots of attendants, delicate fans fluttering like captured birds, and the soft glow of candlelight on pearl necklaces. She noted the careful arrangement of bouquets at each table, roses and lilies interspersed with sprigs of fragrant rosemary, the air thick with the mingled scents of flowers and perfume. She sought refuge in detail, in the small elements that spoke of thought and artistry, and in those moments she reminded herself that beauty could exist quietly, beyond the raucous approval of society. Her heart, still tender from the morning's humiliation, sought a tether to something real and unwavering. From across the hall, a movement caught her attention. The Duke of Ashford, tall and poised, stood near the edge of the room, speaking with a small group of dignitaries. Even in the formal posture demanded by his station, he carried an air of ease, the kind that commanded notice without demanding it. Eleanor felt an almost imperceptible pull toward him, a recognition that beneath the rigid manners and polished exterior lay a man who saw more than appearances. His dark eyes, steady and observant, lingered briefly on her, and in that glance, Eleanor perceived a curiosity that was neither casual nor fleeting. It was an acknowledgment, delicate but potent, that she existed beyond the whispers and judgments of the court. As the first notes of a waltz sounded anew, Marguerite swept forward with practiced grace, capturing a partner without hesitation. Eleanor lingered at the edge, uncertain, her hands smoothing the folds of her gown. The Duke's gaze returned to her, sharper now, as if silently inviting her to step forward. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had been trained to follow the rhythms of society, to observe propriety, yet this subtle summons seemed to bypass convention entirely. She hesitated, a small, measured step into a new space, the marble cold beneath her slippers, the candle's reflections dancing in her eyes. Moments later, a servant approached Eleanor with a delicate white rose, its petals pristine, a single ribbon tied with meticulous care. She lifted it, astonished, noting the faint scent of morning dew still clinging to its bloom. A folded note accompanied it, written in the Duke's hand. For the one who walks quietly, but with a light that cannot be dimmed. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she read, her heart straining between disbelief and hope. Courtiers murmured, some curious, others scandalized, yet no one could place the sender without breaching decorum. She felt a flutter of warmth, a whispered reassurance that even amidst derision, there existed recognition, attentiveness, and perhaps even admiration. Marguerite, noticing the gift, allowed her smile to falter, her composure slightly cracked by the unexpected attention. She leaned close to Eleanor, voice low but cutting. A rose, is it? How quaint. Do you imagine it will change anything? Eleanor raised her eyes, meeting her sister's gaze not with anger, but with quiet resilience. The rose was more than a flower. It was a declaration of notice, a gesture of something unspoken yet profoundly significant. She tucked it close to her heart, a talisman against ridicule, and stepped lightly into the center of the hall, drawing the Duke's attention once more. He approached, slow and deliberate, the candles catching the edge of his dark coat, casting long shadows across the marble. Eleanor's breath caught, and in the hushed anticipation that fell between them, the room seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them suspended in the weight of possibility. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice quiet yet commanding, carrying the subtle timbre of sincerity and intent. Eleanor inclined her head, cheeks flushed with both surprise and the warmth of acknowledgment. Her fingers slid into his, tentative yet trusting, and as they moved into the rhythm of the waltz, the court's whispers shifted, caught between admiration and scandalized fascination. The music swelled around them, and Eleanor felt a strange, liberating lightness as she moved in time with the Duke. Each step, each turn, was both a dance and a conversation, a subtle negotiation between propriety and the stirrings of a heart long kept cautious. She felt the gentle strength of his hand guiding her, the quiet confidence in his touch, and the unspoken understanding that her worth was seen in ways her sister had never perceived. The room, once a crucible of judgment, became a stage where recognition and gentle affection intertwined, defying expectation and announcing a small, yet profound, rebellion against whispered cruelty. Yet even as Eleanor felt this delicate shift, the eyes of the court were upon her, and she sensed the careful tension in every glance, every murmur, a reminder that admiration and scandal often share a single coin. Marguerite's lips pressed into a thin line, the faintest flicker of anger or envy flashing in her gaze, as she realized that Eleanor's quiet dignity was commanding attention that could not be easily dismissed. The rose tucked near Eleanor's heart seemed to pulse with significance, a small beacon amid the scrutiny, a herald of possibilities that had only just begun. As the final notes of the waltz lingered in the air, Eleanor felt a trembling sense of anticipation, a quiet awakening to the knowledge that she might be seen, truly and wholly, beyond the ridicule and derision that had long defined her. The Duke's steady gaze met hers again, unspoken yet charged with intent, and Eleanor understood that this evening had shifted the balance of her world, however slightly. The whispers of society could not undo the subtle defiance in her step, the grace in her bearing, or the acknowledgment in his eyes. She drew a slow breath, heart racing, and allowed herself a fleeting smile, one tinged with hope, curiosity, and cautious courage. A new chapter, delicate yet insistent, seemed poised to unfold, and Eleanor felt the stirrings of something she had not dared imagine, a life where dignity, recognition, and perhaps love might exist beyond the shadows of ridicule. And as she glanced once more across the room, meeting the Duke's gaze with steady eyes, she could not help but wonder what revelation or bold gesture awaited her next, a thought that left her heart quickened and the evening pregnant with possibility. The grand hall was ablaze with light, each chandelier suspended like a constellation captured within gilded cages. Candle flames flickered and danced upon polished marble, casting a warm glow on the assembled guests, whose murmurs mingled with the gentle strains of the orchestra. Lady Eleanor stood near the center of the room, her pale blue gown gleaming softly in the golden illumination, the delicate white rose still held lightly in her hand. The weight of the hall's attention pressed upon her chest, yet beneath it lay a growing current of courage she had not known she possessed. Tonight, the whispered scorn of her sister seemed distant, almost irrelevant, for the Duke's eyes had found hers again, steady and unwavering, a tether of reassurance in the glittering tumult. Marguerite, draped in deep emerald, floated near the edges of the gathering, her calculated smile a mask for the surprise and agitation flickering in her eyes. She had anticipated ridicule, yes, and perhaps quiet attention, but she had not expected Eleanor to command the gaze of the Duke with such quiet authority. The contrast was subtle yet undeniable. Eleanor's grace was understated, her intelligence evident in the poised way she moved, in the gentle clarity of her gaze, in the soft humility that somehow magnified rather than diminished her presence. Every courtesan's whisper, every sideways glance, confirmed what Eleanor had only dared to imagine, that she was no longer invisible. The orchestra shifted seamlessly into a waltz, slow and deliberate, each note swelling as if to mark the tension that hung thick in the air. The Duke stepped forward, his polished boots quiet against the marble, the very sight of him commanding attention without a word. Eleanor felt a thrill pass through her chest, a fluttering awareness that her life's ordinary rhythm had been interrupted by something extraordinary. The Duke paused a mere foot away, his dark eyes tracing the delicate lines of her face, noting the subtle curve of her lips, the faint flush upon her cheeks. He inclined his head slightly, a formal bow infused with unmistakable sincerity, and in that gesture, Eleanor felt the quiet acknowledgment of her worth, the promise of something unspoken but deeply felt. Marguerite's lips parted, the faintest exhalation betraying shock. She leaned slightly toward a neighboring guest, whispering something with a sharp edge, though Eleanor only caught the glimmer of envy in her words. Yet the moment passed, eclipsed by the weight of the Duke's gaze, which remained fixed and intent upon her. His hand, gloved yet firm, extended toward her, and Eleanor, heart pounding, allowed herself to place her small hand within it. The contact was gentle yet electric, a subtle declaration that in a world governed by scrutiny and expectation, they had found one another. Courtiers gasped quietly, whispers spiraling into murmurs of astonishment, for the audacity of the act, though entirely decorous, bore a resonance that transcended etiquette. The Duke's voice, measured and rich, carried across the hall with clarity. "Lady Eleanor, may I have your attention?" Heads turned, eyes widening, as the room fell into a suspended hush. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, the moment poised delicately between anticipation and awe. The Duke's gaze did not waver. It held hers with an intensity that both steadied and exhilarated. "I have observed you," he continued, voice smooth as silk, "through the moments both grand and quiet, and I have found in you a light that commands notice, a mind both subtle and discerning, and a heart I wish to honor above all else." His words, formal yet intimate, resonated in the warm air, reaching Eleanor's ears as both declaration and revelation. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the rose, a symbolic talisman of the recognition that had been growing all evening. Her heart raced, a rhythm in concert with the orchestra's gentle cadence, as she realized that the moment she had longed for in secret, the acknowledgement of her worth beyond whispers and ridicule, had arrived. Courtiers shifted in their seats, leaning forward, the tension palpable. Marguerite's composure faltered. A flicker of disbelief passed across her sharp features as she noted, with growing alarm, the Duke's unwavering focus upon Eleanor. It was a focus no amount of ridicule, no amount of social maneuvering, could deflect. "And so," the Duke said, his voice rising just enough to reach the far corners of the hall, "I ask this of you, in the sight of all who bear witness to this evening. Will you allow me the honor of calling you mine, to walk beside you in life with the respect, admiration, and care your heart deserves?" He paused, giving weight to the words, the candle's flames reflecting in his dark eyes. Eleanor felt her breath catch, the delicate tremor of anticipation threading through every fiber of her being. The room held its collective breath, suspended between propriety and the extraordinary gesture unfolding before them. Her cheeks warmed with both shock and delight, yet her eyes, steady and clear, met his without hesitation. She inclined her head slightly, a curtsy both humble and radiant, and in her quiet voice, suffused with emotion she had long contained, she said, "I shall be honored." The simplicity of her words belied the depth of feeling within, a heart finally recognized, a dignity restored, and a hope fulfilled in a world often cruel to those who remain gentle. The murmurs that rose around them carried not derision but awe, the transformation of whispered scandal into admiration and whispered excitement. The Duke extended his hand fully now, and Eleanor placed hers within it, the connection both physical and symbolic, bridging the space between uncertainty and promise. As the orchestra swelled into a gentle reprise, the Duke guided her into a slow, measured waltz, their movements harmonious, seamless, a dance of recognition and newfound intimacy. The hall itself seemed to yield to their presence, the glimmering candles and polished floors forming a stage for a romance that had blossomed from whispers, scorn, and quiet observation into something undeniable and tender. Marguerite's lips pressed into a thin line, her envy tempered only by the realization that Eleanor's dignity and charm had won what her ambition could not. The courtiers, once eager for gossip, now leaned in with curiosity, witnessing a display of grace and affection that transcended the ordinary, a moment suspended in the glow of candlelight and the soft strains of music. Eleanor, though acutely aware of the eyes upon her, felt no fear. Instead, she experienced a lightness, a release from the shadows that had long clung to her presence. Each step, each gentle turn, confirmed the shift that had begun with a single white rose, a subtle gesture of recognition that had blossomed into public acknowledgement and sincere affection. As the final notes of the waltz lingered, Eleanor felt the Duke's gaze hold hers, with a quiet promise, unspoken yet profoundly understood. The hall erupted in polite applause, the sound a mixture of delight, respect, and admiration. She allowed herself a small, radiant smile, one that carried both relief and joy, a smile that signaled not only acceptance, but a courage newly discovered. The rose in her hand seemed to pulse with significance, the emblem of a journey from whispered scorn to public acknowledgement, from isolation to connection. And as Eleanor followed the Duke's lead to the edge of the ballroom, where light met shadow and expectation met reality, she felt the tremor of a world poised to reveal more wonders still. The evening had shifted, irrevocably and beautifully, and though the eyes of society remained upon her, Eleanor knew, with a quiet certainty, that she had stepped into a new chapter, a chapter where dignity, recognition, and perhaps love itself awaited, in forms yet unseen but deeply felt. The soft gleam of the chandelier reflected in her eyes, mirroring the spark of anticipation, leaving her breath caught between awe and hope, aware that the most extraordinary gestures often emerge where one least expects them.